Right. Kia ora koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our final post-Cabinet press conference of the year. I suspect we're all enjoying that prospect in equal measure, but I hope everyone gets the decent break that they deserve over the Christmas period. This week, the House sits for a final time, wrapping up on the Wednesday afternoon with the adjournment debate. Ahead of that, on Wednesday morning, President Zelensky of Ukraine will address the New Zealand House of Representatives via video link. Those who have been covering Parliament for some years will know that that is a relatively unprecedented event, with the exception of Prime Minister Gillard, who a couple of terms ago addressed Parliament. On Tuesday, I will join the Black Ferns at their public celebration here at Parliament, and on Thursday I will speak at the police graduation of Wing 361, marking over 3,600 new recruits in the past 5 years. This week, the government has a focus on the final reading of Smoke-Free 2025 legislation, which will effectively produce the world's first entirely smoke-free generation, as tobacco will not be sold to anyone born on or after the 1st of January 2009. Wednesday marks the 5-year anniversary of our Families Package, another initiative I'm really proud of, which has helped reduce child poverty and lift the incomes of a large number of New Zealand families. On Wednesday, we also have the Treasury's half-year economic and fiscal update and the budget policy statement from the Finance Minister. So a number of issues wrapping up as the year ends, which brings me to Cabinet's decisions today, during which we reviewed the Green List, our fast-track to residency visa process to fill skills gaps. The current situation in New Zealand is this. We have more New Zealanders in work right now than ever before, and the highest participation rate in the labour force on record. We're also training more people, with 240,000 supported into trades and training since July 2020. On the international front, Immigration New Zealand has approved more than 94,000 job check positions for businesses to look for workers from overseas since June, a number larger than the population of Palmerston North, with over 17,000 accredited employer work visas now approved. Over 8,000 of these workers have arrived in the country and counting. We've approved more than 40,000 working holiday makers to come in since March, a number larger than the population of Gisborne, with more than 21,000 already here for the busy summer season. And so net migration has already turned positive. The last 4 months we have data for, July, August, September and October, have all had positive net migration according to Statistics New Zealand. We're maximising job training, job opportunities and job openings. However, global worker shortages are contributing to worker shortages here as businesses look to hire more employees due to strong profits and the resilient economy. It's very clear a worker shortage persists, and not just here, but most markets we compete with. As I said, there are 94,000 roles approved and ready to be filled. Now we need to fill them. We need to attract skilled workers to our shores, with our pay, with our conditions, and with certainty. So in discussions with business and sector groups, we're expanding on our plan to make New Zealand the most attractive place in the world to live. That's why today we're announcing the expansion of the Green List, which provides 2 fast tracks to residency to help attract people to New Zealand and fill labour shortages. We will expand the Green List to include further professions across healthcare, construction and education in particular, and improvements for some already on the list. 4 professions will be added to the straight to residence pathway. They are nurses, midwives, register auditors and all doctors. The change for nurses, midwives and doctors will take effect almost immediately from this Thursday, the 15th of December. Over 10 professions will be added to the work to residence pathway next year. They are secondary school teachers, in addition to some specialisations already on the list, primary school teachers, civil construction supervisors, gas fitters, drain layers, skilled crane operators, skilled civil machine operators, halal slaughterers, skilled motor mechanics, and skilled telecommunication technicians. We will also expand our sector agreements to allow for time-limited residence pathways for bus and truck drivers. To provide greater certainty for employers too, we will automatically extend employer accreditation by 12 months if they have applied by July next year. I want to make some specific mention of the changes being made for the health workforce. The World Health Organization has said the world is likely to be short by 10 million health workers by 2030. Since the pandemic, over 2,900 nurses have arrived in New Zealand through the critical health worker border exception. Since March, over 4,500 internationally qualified nurses have applied for registration with the Nursing Council. That's 4,500. We already have one of the easiest pathways for nurses abroad to come and work and live here, and we've already granted residence for those willing to work 2 years here. But in a crowded market, let's make the message even simpler. Our message to nurses everywhere: we are the best place to live, work and play. You will be able to seek immediate residence. As a nation, we are in demand. It's not just our reputation as a safe, clean, green and beautiful place, but with wages growing faster than inflation and the 9th lowest inflation out of 38 OECD countries, we have much to offer. 2023 will see the government focus squarely on what it will take to get through the cost of living challenges that come with global economies contracting. And we set ourselves up today to widen the workforce we need to prepare for what's to come, both the challenges and the opportunities. I'll hand now to Immigration Minister Michael Wood to provide further details, and then we'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Today we have announced a suite of measures to further support New Zealand businesses through the global labour shortage and to retain more high-skilled workers in the long term. During a time of a global economic downturn, New Zealand's strong economic position presents further opportunities to attract more high-skilled migrant workers to our shores. Our government has worked closely with sectors who are feeling the effects of the global workforce shortages the hardest, and we're moving to adjust immigration settings in line with those conversations. And you've seen a number of changes over recent months to reflect that. As announced by the Prime Minister, from this week, registered nurses, specialised healthcare roles and midwives will have an immediate pathway to residence. And from March, the Green List will be further expanded to include additional roles. All applicants will be able to count their time from the 29th of September 2021 towards their work to residency requirement. The Green List has been under ongoing review, and the next review will occur in mid-2023. We'll continue to monitor our settings to ensure that they remain fit for purpose. Additional measures announced today confirm, firstly, automatically extending employer accreditation by 12 months if the employer's first accreditation is applied before the 4th of July 2023, and not extending accreditation employers' requirements to all other employers in 2023 as previously proposed. Introducing a streamlined specific purpose work visa that long-term critical workers can apply for to allow them to continue to work in their current role for up to 3 years. And also providing a 12-month open work visa for approximately 1,800 previous holders of post-study work visas who missed out because of the border closures in 2020 and 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Since our borders reopened, our government has taken a number of steps to support businesses, including issuing approvals for businesses to internationally recruit for over 94,000 positions, granting over 40,000 working holiday visas, reopening the Pacific Access category and the Samoan quota, delivering the largest increase in a decade to the RSE scheme, resuming the skilled migrant category and parent category visas, which was closed in 2016 to strengthen our international offering. The evidence is clear that the international labour market is tight and will continue to be so. There is no immediate fix, but these changes will make a real and positive difference. Overall, with the suite of measures announced today, alongside the likes of the skilled migrant category and accredited employer work visa, I'm confident that Aotearoa New Zealand has the settings that we need to access skilled labour, support migrants and help us get through the challenging year ahead.
Thank you, Minister. Happy to take questions. Yeah, Barry.
Just a few weeks ago, the government was saying that nurses couldn't go on the Green List because it couldn't be assured that they would stay longer than 2 years. What's changed?
Well, obviously, even that pathway has made a difference. 4,500 internationally qualified nurses have applied to the Nursing Council. But what we're seeing is a globally competitive environment. We see shortages around the world. Coming into our winter period, we want to make sure that we have a very clear and simple message amongst that competition, and that message is come to New Zealand.
What took you so long to allow them?
Yeah, I would still come back to the point that, Barry, 4,500 internationally qualified nurses applying to the Nursing Council, that pathway that was already there has made a difference, but the competition is only going to increase. Let's get ahead of that and remove any perception that anywhere is presenting a better offering than us into the future.
I would say you're well behind it.
Again, I would say 4,500 internationally qualified nurses seeking to come to New Zealand would not suggest that, but let's get in front of this issue. I was just reading this morning the competition that we're going to see from increasing shortages in places like Canada and the UK and, of course, Australia. We're already demonstrating we're competitive, but let's keep getting in front of that competition. I'll come to Jenna. We've got time, everyone.
That 4,500 number that you're using, are those all nurses that are offshore right now seeking to come to New Zealand?
No, I don't necessarily believe they will necessarily all be offshore. Someone who works closely on, I couldn't tell you the breakdown, but they are all internationally,
Isn't it?
they are all internationally qualified who are seeking to register with the Nursing Council. The way it's being explained, I couldn't necessarily tell if that's the case, Jenna, but the way it's being explained to me is that some will come and work in other areas but won't be working obviously until they get that accreditation through the Nursing Council. I think the point there is that that is just this year, so it demonstrates that we are attracting nurses, but there's a global shortage. Let's get in front of things and continue to ensure that we're as competitive as we can be. Ultimately, we've heard the ask. The ask was, make the message simpler. We've done that.
You're looking at the settings as they were, you got it wrong, didn't you?
Again, as I say, the numbers demonstrate that people are seeking to come to New Zealand, but people have asked within the sector, make the message even simpler, and we have.
Numbers that show people are not seeking to come to New Zealand.
The two I've provided today, 2,900 under the critical workers visa, nurses, 4,500 have applied to the Nursing Council in order to operate here in New Zealand, but we've also at the same time had the ask, make it simpler, so we have.
Any projections around...
So if I can just add to
Minister
that,
Wood.
and it is an important point, what we've seen this year under the settings we've put in place is quarter on quarter, the number of internationally qualified nurses seeking registration has continued to grow through the year. So it's not just that it's a large number overall, we have been seeing an increase through the course of the year.
And that accredited employer work visa, there are more massage therapists that have applied to come here than nurses.
Well, that's right, and that's because over the course of the year we've had multiple visa pathways for nurses. Most of the nurses through the course of this year have come through the critical purpose visa, not the accredited employer work visa, but we're now beginning to see that transition and most nurses coming through the AWV.
Since the pandemic, 2,900 nurses have arrived to work in New Zealand as nurses. And again, I've already given you the background on the applications. My recollection is in the last month we had total figures for the Nursing Council was 900 in 1 month. But we've heeded the call. The ask has been, make the pitch even simpler. So we have.
Any projections around...
Prime Minister and Minister Wood, I mean, just about anyone in the sector has been saying for 6 months that it was crazy that nurses were let off the green list. I mean, how is it that the government seem to be the last ones to know this?
We run the risk of being repetitive here, but the numbers speak for themselves. When you have record numbers applying to the Nursing Council, internationally qualified nurses, record numbers applying for the ability to work in New Zealand, it demonstrates that we were attracting nurses. We want to get ahead of the issue though. We've been asked to simplify it, and we've listened and we've made that change.
Luke,
broadening it
so
out.
Luke, if I can just add to that as well, the government at no point over the last few months has said that we would not consider that either. Our position consistently has been that we will listen to what we're hearing from this sector and others and work pragmatically with them.
Broadening out beyond...
I'll let you finish.
Broadening out beyond nurses, I mean, it's been clear for the last 6 to 12 months that the New Zealand economy is capacity constrained. A big part of that has been a shortage of labour. I mean, do you think you're coming, I mean, you said you've heard the ask, but do you think you're coming late to the party again? This has been a clear...
I'm going to come back to a fundamental point at the beginning here, and something that I've been repeating with the business community as well. I think the assumption has been that it's all about the immigration settings. We currently have 90,000 roles that employers are now able to go out and recruit internationally for. 90,000 90,000. The issue for us is making sure that in that crowded environment, because there is a global skills shortage, that New Zealand comes out on top. And that means having decent wages, decent conditions, and a great place to live and work. New Zealand has that. This is about marketing ourselves successfully, not just about immigration settings. So that's why we've shared those numbers today, because I think it would be wrong to say it's simply about the rules. There's a number of roles already to be filled.
Are there projections about...
Minister, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, look, I think the point more broadly is a really important one, that the settings that we have in New Zealand across the spectrum are as supportive as, or more supportive than nearly any country that you could look at. So whether it's 90,000 job checks that have been issued, or the fact that we're currently running the biggest residency program in our history. We've given out residency to 120,000 migrant workers over the last year. In most years pre-COVID, it would have been 40 or 50,000, and that's because we want to retain those people and their skills here. So yes, we know that it's challenging in many sectors, as it is in every single country, but we're continuing to look at these policies, and you're beginning to see quite substantial numbers coming through.
Processing all of these?
Well, yes, I believe we do.
So we hope to get.
So we take, for example, the 90,000 job checks that have been issued. They are processed in an average of 4 days after when they are received by Immigration New Zealand. Are there improvements to be made within Immigration New Zealand's processing? Yes, and so we continue to review the rules, we continue to put more FTEs in there, but it is now getting to the point where it's giving a good level of service across most areas.
Yeah. I think this is what's interesting to me. Look, I have not been on a trade mission where skills I haven't heard come up in one form or another, and I've repeated this a couple of times, but even talking to someone who worked in hospitality in Vietnam, they expressed that they had trouble recruiting for roles there. Fiji, it's the same. They're concerned that Australia is recruiting their hospitality workers out of Fiji. The same in a number of island nations, but everywhere I go, there is concern about skill shortages. Now, there's a big piece of work to be done to understand what happened post-pandemic to the workforce, because it appears to have disappeared, but that is the reality. There's a rebalance here that the world is going through. New Zealand just has to make sure that in that rebalance that we're at the top of people's lists when they're seeking where they may choose to live, work and play. But I think there is a slight hesitancy, perhaps we haven't seen before, to go and work offshore. So we need to make sure that we are putting our best foot forward. Jason.
Is there a concern that given this influx of new workforce that'll put further pressure and further exacerbate inflation?
Well, it's a really interesting point, and I noted that when the Reserve Bank Governor spoke on this comment a couple of weeks ago, he acknowledged that it's a complex scenario. He acknowledged that workforce shortages can have an impact on inflation, but he also acknowledged that actually increasing your population and increasing your workforce can have a counter impact as well. So he was acknowledging that there are no simple policy choices here. What we're really focused on is that we know that there is a critical economic need here. We know that these shortages are genuine, and it can only be good for our economy to make sure we have the skills we need.
So
I'll let Jason finish.
Have you had your own analysis done, or are you just relying on the Reserve Bank's interpretation of immigration? Surely this would have been in some sort of regulatory impact statement or...
Yeah.
Look, again, this is something that, as the Minister has articulated and as the Governor himself, this is very finely balanced, very difficult, I would say, to be able to forecast the impact of population growth that finely tuned on inflation. But these are calculations that the government's having to make overall in this tricky economic period that we're in. We want to make sure that supply meets demand, that you don't put too much stimulus into the economy at this particular point in time because of what's happening with inflation, but at the same time be mindful of projections around growth in the new year. This is a fine balance that everyone around the world is trying to strike at the moment.
Similar to Jason's question, has the Treasury provided any sort of information on how it believes this will impact inflation? Can we put numbers on it, or is it just too difficult, as you just explained?
My description would be too difficult. Minister?
That's right.
Has it been done?
Yeah.
Has it been done, or is that your summary of it?
That would be my summary of the economic impacts of immigration settings generally. I would want to go and check the analysis that the Minister of Finance may have been provided individually. But to say we are always cautious about where we have a very direct and obvious impact on inflation, that is not the concern at this point with this policy.
Prime Minister, how many extra workers do you think these changes might bring in?
I'll have the Minister of Immigration speak to that.
Yeah, it will vary from sector to sector, Bernard. The nature of the immigration settings that we have is that we don't set a particular target across any sector or across the system. The nature of the way that our system works is that it's effectively based on is there a need for these people in individual sectors. So in some sectors, for example, bus drivers, where we've in today's announcements confirmed a sector agreement in that place, where it's a smaller workforce, we have a pretty good handle. It's probably around 1,000 to 1,500 drivers that we think we're short. Now, will that all be filled by migrant workers? Probably not. Because we're going to be pushing both levers, the domestic training workforce, but we also think that migration plays an important part there. So it's difficult to give an overall figure, but we know that immigration plays one important role in filling these shortages.
So what advice have you received about, how much of a need there is and how many extra workers these policies might come in, or is there no forecast on that either?
Yeah, well, across the engagement that we've had with different sectors, we get different estimates. And if I can give one example of that, so for example, the truck driving sector, we've had different sector groups who have had slightly different views as to what they think the shortfall actually is. We do the best when we're looking at these situations to determine where we think there are real needs, and that's what we've responded to in these announcements.
Forecast from Immigration or Treasury on either the workforce or economic effects of this change?
So look, firstly, on the workforce, for instance, some of those individual sectors will have the number of vacancies that they hold now and their projections over the workforce need in the next 5 to 10 years, and how much we are producing domestically through our current training pathways. So we do have that for some of those individuals. I don't have it here specifically right now for you on some of those individual sections, but that's kind of the analysis that Immigration New Zealand do before they are putting forward the suggestions over whether they believe there is genuinely a domestic shortage. Keep in mind, what we've signalled here is a list that will move on to a pathway to residency or a work to residency, and others that will go straight. Those are already workers that we've already made the decision there's a shortage over. We're just repositioning them on the lists in some cases. Extra ones we'll be making decisions on in March, and that's where we get a bit more granular detail.
So how is this different from any other government simply pulling the migration lever to solve some political or economic problem in a short-term way that leads eventually to infrastructure pressures and higher house prices and all sorts of strains on our infrastructure?
I would say because it's been done within the context of the broader rebalance settings, we've made some very deliberate decisions, for example, about shifting our economic model away from reliance on very high volumes of very low wage labour. So you see, for example, still within the accredited employer work visa system, it's still based on a median wage requirement. We have an employer accreditation system to make sure that migrants aren't exploited when they come into the system. Across the green list settings, which we're talking about explicitly today, we're talking about people with the kind of skills that we actually need to boost our productivity and to build our infrastructure. So as I say, it's within the broader construct of a rebalance, which is about trying to deal with some of those issues and turn our back on what was a pretty unregulated system previously.
Yeah, and I think that's really clear. I mean, one of the issues that we've had with our immigration system is the lack of certainty that we've given individuals. When you're coming here on short-term work visas, you haven't necessarily had that clarity over the longer term. Here we're being really clear. If you're falling into these particular sectors where we have long-term workforce issues, where you are a skilled migrant, where we know we want to hang on to your skills in the long term, we're giving you much clearer certainty about the pathway and what you can expect. And being much clearer that for those areas where you don't have that pathway, we're not giving that guarantee that necessarily you'll have that long-term residency option. I think we owe it to those who come to New Zealand to give that clarity over our expectations. Previously, the system did not have that. Yeah, I'll come to Amelia. Oh, sorry, and then I'll come to you, Joe. Sorry, I missed you.
Prime Minister, the Ombudsman today released a pretty scathing report into the lottery system for MIQ. He's calling for officials to apologise. Do you, A, think that they should apologise, and B, will you apologise to the people who the lottery system wronged?
Look, I mean, this is not obviously the first time we've had this conversation. We've had a number of reports and reviews into the MIQ system, and all the way through as government, we've acknowledged that it helped 230,000 travellers, but it also was incredibly challenging for many others. And there were some who were incredibly distressing situations. And for the fact that it, yes, impacted negatively, we've always acknowledged that. But we also, on the flip side, only did those things in order to save lives. That was the reason MIQ existed. So I haven't had a chance to look at the report in full, but from what I've seen, it looks not unlike some of the court decisions that have already been made. But I will take the time to go and look at it in full. And of course, we have a Royal Commission looking at the use of MIQ generally.
You're right in that it is very similar to the High Court
decision, as I understand.
Which found similar failings. So clearly the High Court and the Ombudsman have now found the same failings in the system. So why not apologise to those who were hard done by and in fact wronged by
But let's keep in mind that the issue that they've raised is not the existence of MIQ. The existence of MIQ, I think, is understandably being seen as necessary, as hard and as difficult as it was. It was a method of distributing places. There were always going to be individuals who would have been found themselves in difficult circumstances because we had more people than we had places. So we tried to fix a problem with a system that has been found less wanting. We acknowledge that. We wouldn't use a similar system in the future, but our hope is not to be in that situation again.
Disabled people in particular, though, weren't able to access the lottery system and had to be helped through it. And the Ombudsman says those people deserve an apology.
You'll forgive me that it is not particularly going to be so satisfying for me to offer an apology without even having read the report. Would you forgive me for allowing me to at least read what has been found? But I wouldn't characterise at all that we haven't in the past acknowledged, we have acknowledged how difficult this system was, the distress it caused people, and we would not repeat that same form of allocation again. But we stand by the fact that generally MIQ saved lives, including those who were severely immunocompromised.
And for those who couldn't get an MIQ voucher, there was a back door that was the transit flight through Auckland and then not getting the last leg of the flight. Officials considered making that an imprisonable offence to use that back door. Isn't that extremely heavy-handed to actually imprison New Zealanders looking to come home?
But keep in mind that we had like there was a small handful of examples where it appeared that was being deliberately used to circumvent the process. Again, I would have to track back to look at the advice that were given from officials at that time, but we were aware of it. We wanted to, of course, discourage it because there was so much distress for those who were already using the system, but I couldn't give you a blow-by-blow account of the individual recommendations that were made at that time without going back and looking.
Did Cabinet today discuss the extent...
Sorry, I did say I'd go to Joe and then to Jason.
Minister Wood, you talked before about two levers, the domestic and then the migrant lever. How much of the domestic lever, I guess, is sort of exhausted at this point, and how heavy is the reliance? And I know, going back to Bernard's question, you can't put numbers on it, but how heavy is the reliance now on the migrant factor? Because, and when it comes to skills training, actually there's just not a whole heap of people left in that area.
It still remains enormously important to us. One of the reasons that we have some of the challenges that we're dealing with now is that for the past 20 plus years, we collectively as a system and as a country haven't put the energy and the investment into some of those domestic training pathways. So that's why things like the apprenticeship boost that we introduced during COVID have been so important. An additional 40,000 young people getting involved in trades training and apprenticeships. And that's in some of the professions that we're talking about here today. And we know that over the coming years they'll be able to start coming through and filling roles like being drain layers or gas fitters, but it's going to take us a little bit of time to get there. So
another long-term strategy.
Yeah,
basically.
Medium to long-term depending on the level of skills. Some of these roles, particularly the more senior medical roles, they can be 5-6 years plus from getting someone into the system before having them ready to enter the workforce fully. So you do need to use both.
Yeah,
so
on that basis then, if that's your sort of medium to more long-term strategy, then coming back to the point that was made earlier, when it comes to pressures on infrastructure, housing, all that sort of stuff, if you are in the short term relying predominantly on people coming into New Zealand, extra people, you are going to be putting a lot more pressure on local infrastructure, aren't you?
We have outflows.
In the short term.
Keep in mind, we have outflows as well.
That is right. But here I'd actually go back to Ganesh Nana's Productivity Commission report from last year, where with some of the best analysis available at the Productivity Commission, they've looked at the evidence in this area and come to the conclusion that actually, broadly speaking, we need a migrant workforce in New Zealand if we want to have the skills and we want to have the capacity to deal with the infrastructure deficit, and that immigration is not to blame for the infrastructure deficits that have built up over 30 or 40 years. So I think it would be a fair critique if we weren't getting on with the infrastructure build at the same time, but we are.
And I guess in terms of caps then, like when it comes to immigration and sort of, I know again you said that you can't put a number on how many you might have come in order to sort of solve that issue, but is there a point where you say, well actually infrastructure hasn't moved along at a pace, we don't have the ability, do you cap out at some point?
Well, as the Prime Minister said, across most of these areas, we do have estimates as to what our shortfalls might be in the workforce. The point I was making is that we will fill those shortfalls both through domestic and migration pathways. Just to come to the question there, the answer is that we need to put the foot down. That's what we're doing on the immigration front, whether it's across transport, whether it's across some of the core housing infrastructure that we need, and we can demonstrate the record investment and some of the outcomes that are coming through there.
I think I did say I'd come to Ben, then I'll come to you, Jane.
Jason, was.
Oh, I thought it was Ben, sorry.
Happily
no, I already came to Jason. So I won't give Jason a round two just yet. I'll go to Jane then if we're not going to...
You literally said Jason.
Oh, sorry, forgive me. Jane.
Okay. Was there a decision made on fuel excise and the subsidy, and if so, what?
We'll be making announcements on the future of the fuel excise reductions this week. We're very aware that even though they run through till the end of January, that we do need to give people some certainty in the ability to plan, particularly the sector.
What about public transport subsidies? Are they included in
We'll be talking about the whole suite, all of the knock-ons from the excise decision. And given that we talked about public transport in the first instance around those reductions, we'll be also talking about public transport at the same time.
Was there any other discussion, looking ahead to, I suppose, the reset that has been flagged around any portfolios or any project
all for next year
that might have been brought up high to the priority list for looking at?
Again, as I've indicated several times, I've asked ministers to go away over the summer, and so that's what we'll do.
Minister, thank you.
Forgive me if I called you Jason.
Apologies. To say sorry for that.
Yeah, it's all in the eye of the beholder. Ben.
Given the global war on talent, or for talent and skills, what will New Zealand rely upon to attract people, given it can't compete with countries like Australia on wages?
Do you want to have a first blush at that, Minister?
A few things there. I think the first is that, as the Prime Minister said before, we've got a really unique proposition for people. This is one of the most stable, peaceful, beautiful countries in the world, and it's why consistently over the decades people have found New Zealand an attractive place to live and settle. You talk to most people parts of the world, and the prospect of living in New Zealand, if there's a good job there, is an attractive one. So that's something I think we can really double down on. I do just want to address the wages point though, because you're right that we do face that differential, and that has held us back sometimes. That is one of the reasons why, for our government, continuing to invest and have the policies in place that make sure we have decent wages and good conditions for people is important. And you see that in part in this announcement today. So the bus drivers sector agreement, for example, is explicitly about the fact that we are moving to lift bus driver wages and saying to employers in that sector, we'll help you to recruit, but we need you to make the commitment to be lifting wages to a more sustainable level at the same time. Across many of these workforces, our policies are and will be leading to better and more sustainable pay and conditions as well. So I don't think we should give up on that fact. We should be making sure that we pay people well and treat people well as putting forward the broader offer for New Zealand.
I'd say, Ben, you're probably better placed than most to talk about what brings people to New Zealand and indeed what keeps them here. It'll be a raft of individual reasons, but we have to keep promoting those things that people already believe and know to be true about New Zealand. Clean, green, safe place to come, raise a family and have a fantastic work experience. When I've been offshore, I've met a number of individuals who are either considering coming to New Zealand or are planning to. In the UK recently, a doctor who was coming to live and work in New Zealand. We do have a strong proposition. We've got to make it a really clear one, and that's what these announcements are about today.
Because you referenced outflows before,
yeah.
It's easing infrastructure in that context.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable with the level of Kiwis that are currently upping the sticks and moving to Australia at the moment?
Well, at the moment we have, net positive, and so that's often what's being used as an indication of whether or not we're addressing where we have need and skills gaps.
In what reference is that?
I referenced it in my introductory remarks of the fact that in the past 4 months that we have data for, July, August, September and October, we've had positive net migration.
But there were
To Australia.
Yeah.
To Australia.
Oh, sorry, not specific. Oh, right.
But just,
Sorry, I'm not being specific to that.
just an interesting little factoid on that one. If you're talking about the flow of New Zealanders, for every month between the beginning of the year 2000 until the start of COVID, there was a small net outflow of New Zealanders. That is business as usual, that New Zealanders go out and travel, and it's always been the case that we've balanced the inflows and outflows between Kiwis going out and people from offshores coming in.
Yeah. Now, who haven't we had? Thomas?
On your sort of summer policy reset, how likely is it that unemployment insurance proposal survives that reset? Is that a high priority to keep? Or
I appreciate that there'll be everyone in this room who may have one or two things they're going to throw into that mix and try and get some indication from me. As I've said, it would be unreasonable of me to say I'm giving ministers the summer to go away and look at our legislative program and different policies to consider and then get into the situation of ruling in or out a whole bunch of policy. I won't be starting that practice. Do not read into the fact I'm not giving specifics on any of them, because I won't, because it is simply the case that I'm giving ministers space.
on 16-year-olds voting, it's pretty clear that you don't have the numbers to change the general election voting age, but you do have the numbers to change the local election voting age. Are you, in the legislation that you put forward, will there be a provision to allow that local voting age to progress, or do you want to do it all at once?
We will be looking to get into the detail around the legislation in the new year. It's not something that will be put to this House this side of Christmas. And one of the benefits, I hope, of that will just allow there to be a bit more conversation and discussion over the issue generally, because obviously the sooner it comes to the House, then the sooner the question gets answered. I want to give it a time for a bit of discussion and thought to be given to it all.
What's the purpose of New Zealand's immigration policy now?
What is the purpose of New Zealand's immigration policy? The purpose statement for immigration, I'll let the Minister start.
Yeah, look, I'd encapsulate it by saying it's about supporting New Zealand's economy and productivity. It's about making sure that this is a good place for people to live and contribute.
So all these professions could have gotten residency through the old point system. So what is, and then they couldn't because the point system was taken away, and now they can because you're making an exception. So why the sort of roundabout?
I wouldn't necessarily be so sure that all of these roles would have under the old point system, actually. The way that we are setting up the system, of course, is to have the skilled migrant category at the core of the way in which people can seek residency as a result of their skills. The green list then effectively gives us a bit of flexibility for some of those roles that might not quite make the grade there. So we're trying to cover off the bases, those roles that have a high level of skills and make the skilled migrant category, but also other roles where there are critical shortages but don't have that option.
People had skills, they had qualification, they had experience, or they stayed here for a certain level of time, then they could have gotten residency under the old system, right?
Except think of the certainty as well. The point system does not tell you straight off the bat whether or not you're going to be on that pathway. The system does, and I think certainty is important.
But it's over a period of time, right? So in a couple of years,
I mean, to give a really particular example, for example, the bus driver sector agreement that we've announced today, which will give a pathway to residency, that is an occupational group that would not have had a pathway to residency under the old point system.
They're guaranteed residency no matter change of government, change of policy. They guaranteed it after a certain period of time.
It would be very unusual for someone who's already on an existing rule to have the rule changed midway through. You might see transition approaches for, if you have a change of government and change of policy, but it would be rare to whip out from underneath someone a pathway that they may already be on.
And just to underscore the point we made at the beginning, This is a significant simplification over the previous settings. So if we go back to nurses, for example, only a small group of nurses had a clear pathway to residency under the previous settings. We brought all 13 occupational groups together through the green list 2-year approach. They've now all got the straight to residency option. So it is streamlining and simplifying it significantly and gives that ability for health employers to go out into the international market and make it as clear as possible.
And just on the RSE scheme, so the Human Rights Commission says there's systemic problems. The employers say there isn't, and it's bad apples. What do you think?
Well, we've been working through this issue really carefully, as you'll be aware. For the first time, I think, in the existence of the scheme, we made the decision about the cap numbers this year by getting employers, unions representing the voice of workers in the room, and we talked about more than just the number. We talked about some of the improvements that we would want to make, and that process is ongoing now. So we'll move into a full review next year. I look forward to the Commissioner being a part of that review. I think she's been a really useful voice in this debate, but also we're not hanging back and in the meantime, I can confirm today that we've already agreed changes through that tripartite process. There's now going to be an improved process for employers to be required to take employment modules so they can be crystal clear about their obligations, and we're also going to move forward with a freeze on accommodation costs in the coming season as well. So we're definitely hearing those issues, making changes, and we'll look at the more systemic issues through the full review, and everyone will be at the table for that.
Can I just check if anyone had anything further on the RSE, just to close that out?
Just to follow on with that, in light of today's findings and the government's own review of the RSE scheme, why did the government raise the cap for RSE workers rather than wait for the reviews to finish and for improvements to be made?
As I was saying, the process that we went through this year wasn't just about the cap. We had employers and unions representing workers sitting down at the table and saying, how do we want to take this scheme together sustainably? And they said to us that we could move forward with a cap increase, but there needed to be a more collaborative process, and there needed to be some of these changes that went along at the same time. So that's where we took our guidance as a government from that tripartite discussion, and that's how we'll carry things forward. I think we can all see that improvements are needed in this area. We're getting on with those, and we will follow.
There is also the issue that there are some good employers who have been using the RSE scheme for a number of years, who have a strong relationship with the workers that they are connected with season after season. There are others who are not. We need to crack down on them whilst not seeing fruit rot on the ground because of that group that we need to address.
Have you, Prime Minister? I just asked, I know you're not ruling anything in or out.
No, I think we've been nice and hopefully clear on that.
Is it possible that you will cancel the merger?
And I'll give the same answer that I gave this morning on that same question. I've asked ministers over the summer period, go through your legislative program, go through your policy program. 2023 needs to be an absolute focus on the economic situation experienced globally. We need to be ensuring we're supporting New Zealanders and have a clear eye on that issue. We do need to trim back the amount of issues that we are progressing as a government. I won't specifically give you a list at this stage, but that is my ask. So I think I probably said as much as I will on that. Mark?
On COVID vaccines, particularly the Omicron-specific ones, they've been approved overseas in the US, the EU, the UK, for months and months now. What's taking so long here?
The bivariant vaccines?
Yeah, and do you really think MedSafe's process is going to uncover an issue that the FDA missed, that the UK regulator missed, that the EU regulator missed?
No, but I will, if you'll allow me, have Minister Verrill give you an update on that. This is one of those issues where I've seen a number of briefings and I can't be sure on what is in the public domain yet. So I will ask Minister Verrill to give you an update over the next week.
So just on the Ombudsman report, in that he was quite critical of the advice being given to ministers to make their decisions.
Yeah, I've seen that.
The impact it would have on people. Are you concerned about that environment around this officials giving advice to ministers, and will you do anything to address?
All I can say is that, of course, we take a very firm and clear view on the importance of free and frank advice. If there's anything in the report that demonstrates that there was any reason that's within our control that prevented that from coming forward, we, of course, will look closely into what we can do, if anything, to improve that.
The study has found that the level of microplastics
Did I have anyone at the back?
Just how many MPs are you announcing are retiring tonight?
I haven't given a number, but you don't have to wait long. Gina?
A study has found the level of microplastics falling over Auckland each year is equivalent to 3 million plastic bottles. Are we doing enough to combat plastic pollution?
I'd ask if you wouldn't mind talking to the Minister for the Environment on that issue.
Another minister today, but no one else is available.
I think you might have been asking during Cabinet. Bernard.
Minister Wood, have you had a response?
I think we had Bernard there first.
Sorry, I'll go to Bernard and then I'll come back to... Sorry, Gina, I'm trying to give a fair allocation across this last press conference. Bernard.
For Minister Wood, you mentioned that the outflow of New Zealanders to Australia was just in line with what we'd seen in the long run, but actually there was net migration of 15,300 New Zealanders to Australia in the last 12 months. That's up from 3,000 in the previous 5 years, and is not much lower than that big 30,000 a year from 2004 to 2013. What's the point of having extremely high housing costs here that push New Zealanders out and then replacing them with new foreigners who maybe don't know how high our housing costs are?
Just for clarity, the figures that I was talking about before weren't specifically about the flow from New Zealand to Australia. It was about the flow of New Zealanders generally travelling around the world and exiting New Zealand on a month-to-month basis. But look, in respect of Australia, I mean, a couple of things I'd note there. The first is that there are similar challenges in terms of housing cost in most large Australian cities at the moment.
Melbourne now.
Secondly, and again, it's a bit similar to the conversation about infrastructure. Of course, we recognise that's an issue. That's why we're pursuing policies to try and assist with that issue.
You're investing $59 billion when the Infrastructure Commission says you need to invest $200 billion.
There has never been a government in the last 50 years that has invested more in directly building houses and providing the infrastructure to build houses and providing the planning framework to enable the more building of houses than this government has.
Just to wrap this, if your argument is that we should ignore the skill shortages we have, and if our hospitals tell us that we don't have the health workforce we need because we don't believe that we've got the infrastructure, I'd push back very, very hard on that. We have done both. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a government that hasn't done more to build the hospitals that we need, the classrooms that we need, and the houses that we need, and indeed the water infrastructure that we need. It has not been without its contention, but we have been focused on fixing our infrastructure. If I may, Gina.
Minister, have you had a response back from officials about possible changes to visa conditions following alleged exploitation at Zirkus Circus? If not, when are you expecting that advice?
I haven't received that formal advice yet, but I do expect it before Christmas.
Prime Minister, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has reportedly said New Zealand and other Western nations have pledged allegiance to Nazis. How offensive is that?
I actually had that raised with me. This is something that was raised some months ago. I, of course, reject any and all Russian disinformation, and that's the category under I would put this.
Is it concerning to you that we have plastics falling on Aucklanders?
Again, I want to make sure that I have the ability to give you a more comprehensive response than what I would if I unfortunately glanced at the front page of a newspaper today. Give me a heads up that you want to get into a topic in a bit of detail, and I'll make sure that I'm ready for that.
Prime Minister.
Your last question in the front, if we may.
Yeah. Minister, to assist with the workforce, wouldn't it be more advantageous to have visa waiver for Pacifica?
I note a couple of things on that front. The first is that we do work really hard in terms of our relationship with our Pacific neighbours through the immigration system, and on trying to provide as much support as we can through the visa system. So you will have seen the announcements that we made earlier this week, for example, which will provide streamlined access for every Pacific country in respect of officials, consular and frequent business visitors. And also, as of this month, we are getting on with opening up the Pacific and Samoan access quotas, which will give a large number of people from the Pacific, through a very special arrangement that only applies to the Pacific, the ability not just to work in New Zealand on a temporary basis, but the ability to settle here as residents. So we've got a lot that's going on there. The question around visa waiver keeps being raised. It's one that we haven't ever ruled out, but at the moment we're broadly comfortable with our settings.
Prime Minister, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Prime Minister, what is your whakaaro on Christopher Luxon's attack on South Auckland garages?
I'll make, if I may, I did signal this would be the last question, so I'll make this the last question and answer. You know, when I I saw the impassioned response from Minister Seal, I can absolutely understand why. To stereotype an entire generation in that way is just wrong. And there was something that particularly stood out to me, which I'll just actually quote from him, from Minister Seal. Luxon does not know South Auckland young people because the majority are good, law-abiding, who listen to their parents, give back to their communities through sport and the church, and lead good lives. That is what I know South Auckland young people to be as well. Thanks, everyone.
Merry Christmas.